Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, where the rabbis at Congregation Avas Torah each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Chaim Pupko, and I am joined by my dear friends and teammates, Rabbi Daniel Goldberg,
Shalom,
and Rabbi Morty Jesus.
Shalom.
If you'd like to sponsor an upcoming episode, please contact the shul. All right, here we go. Our one pasuk for this week, Parshas Toldos, comes from the very beginning of the parsha, Perek Chafhei, pasuk Yutes, chapter 25, verse 19. Ve'ele Toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham holid es Yitzchak. And this is the legacy, the events of the life of Yitzchak, son of Avraham. Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak. This pasuk comes in the wake of the lineage that was listed in last week's parsha of Yishmael, and now the Torah shifts to the lineage of Avraham through Yitzchak, not just to spell out his lineage, but more importantly, to shift the focus of the narrative of the Torah onto Yitzchak as he continues the legacy of his father Avraham.
Okay. Ve'ele toledot Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham holidet Yitzchak. Now, obviously, we know exactly who Yitzchak is. It's Avraham's son. Why does the pasuk tell us not once but twice that Avraham was the one who begot Yitzchak? Rashi famously quotes a midrash that the birth of Yitzchak was rather miraculous. Avraham was very advanced in his age, as was Sarah, and that prompted the Letzaneh Hador to snicker and say, come on, you really think that Avraham and Sarah gave birth to Yitzchak? What are the chances? They were married for all those years and they were never able to have a child. And therefore, God performed a miracle. And he saw to it that Yitzchak was an identical twin almost of Avraham. He looked exactly like Avraham. All because of what? The Letzaneh Hador. Which really begs the question, was it that important for Hashem to really acknowledge these scoffers, people who are going to attempt to minimize a miracle? It is what it is. I mean, you have to deal with the reality of life. Furthermore, the Gemara in Baba Metzia tells us that when Avraham made a special party when Yitzchak was weaned off of Sarah, Sarah went ahead and invited all of the noblewomen that lived in her area, and she encouraged them to bring their own children, and she nursed them, showing, you see, I was really the mother because I am still able to nurse this child. Again, the obvious question the Mefarshim wonder is, why was that so important? After all, these are scoffers. We shouldn't acknowledge them. They don't deserve our attention, yet alone a number of miracles or a public publicity stunt where Avraham invited all the people and then Sarah is nursing these other people's babies. And the Chachamim tell us that we underestimate the danger of letzanut. Sometimes just the smirk on our face or a sidewinded comment can really completely undermine an individual. And so to really emphasize the danger of letzanut, God went ahead and performed this miracle. And Avraham, acknowledging and recognizing the danger that lies within, encouraged Sarah to go and publicly nurse all these other babies just to show that this was in fact a miracle. And let all the naysayers try and challenge it, but it's evident that this is actually what happened. We have to be so careful how we approach situations in life that are serious. And sometimes we may be tempted, or we may find somebody humorous and funny and great to hang out with, but at the end of the day, if they're undermining things that are important, we cannot underestimate the danger of letzanut.
I think cynicism is one of the plagues of our generation. I don't know, maybe every generation says this about themselves, but many people are very cynical. Maybe it's a reflection of society, the economic era, whatever it is, but my father always loved to quote the line that a cynic is someone who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Wow. A cynic is somebody who can only really look at the surface and critique and comment on the surface, but can't really see what's really important, what's really valuable.
I remember once Rabbi Kalish, he said that he had met a student who was struggling, and he was very bothered because this child's father had a reputation of being a mechanech par excellence. He was someone who was incredibly valued, his opinion in areas of chinuch, and it was just surprising to him that he had a child of this nature. And he was always very bothered by this and confused. Like, how does it doesn't add up? I mean, sometimes you see excellent mechanchim, and obviously it has nothing to do with them. It was experiences beyond their control. But this was something that was bothering him. And he said the first time he met the dad, he was sarcastic and cynical. And he said, oh, all my questions have been answered. If you have that attitude, that cynicism, the way of belittling, the way of just snarky comments, you can completely undermine a human being to the extent that this child is visibly suffering. And he was so bothered by just the reputation that already preceded the father was just odd, because he was someone who was so well respected. But yet, as soon as he saw that midah of cynicism, of sarcasm, he said, okay, all this has been explained.
Well, I'll continue in a related but slightly different vein, thinking about the relationship between a father and a son. So, of course, the pasuk here, which is so familiar to us, does something that is unexpected. One would imagine, ve'ele toldos, generally what follows is the progeny of the individual, or the life and experiences of that person. So the fact that the pasuk not only tells us what is already evident to us, that Yitzchak is the son of Abraham, but puts it in this context where we would expect the children of Yitzchak to be listed. But it goes back a generation. That is surprising. Ve'ele toldos Yitzchak ben Abraham, Abraham holid es Yitzchak. It's counterintuitive. And I think that the Torah is telling us something really important and fundamental about Yitzchak's whole life and his persona and the challenges of his life and the blessings of his life, which is that he was the son of the father of monotheism. He was the son of someone who was larger than life, who was an iconoclast, who was a Renaissance man, a man of theology, a man of war, a poet and a writer, and everything that you think of when you think of Avraham Avinu. That was an incredible gift to Yitzchak, to be the child of this person, but also an enormous challenge. It's really hard to be the child of the Gadol Hador. It's really hard to be the child of someone who casts such a giant shadow. And I think that the Torah is telling us that that's kind of, in a certain way, the defining challenge and bracha of Yitzchak's life. And the different shape that Yitzchak's life takes, the different role that he plays, it has to be understood in light of coming after Abraham. He's Abraham's child. And so Yitzchak is very different than Abraham. He redigs the wells of Abraham. He's not as much of an outward figure. He's a much more internal figure, a figure that's characterized by gvura, of maintaining the gains that his father made rather than charting a new course. And that's really to his credit. But this line, which seems like almost like a formulaic line, because of the way that it deviates from the formula, that it gives us Abraham rather than going to his progeny, it's framing Yitzchak in a very fundamental way and giving us a profound insight into how to appreciate Yitzchak and really the godless of Yitzchak and how he navigated the uniqueness of being not the first but the second in this incredible line. So I just think the pasuk, it's unassuming, but it's profound and it's so important in what it offers us.
You actually see that twice. I mentioned this last week in my Derasha. You see that twice later in the Pirasha. When Yitzhak is traveling and he chooses to redig the wells, it says he redug the exact same wells that his father had dug. Why didn't he dig different wells? Well, why was it essential? Furthermore, it says he named them the exact same names that his father had named them. If you were reading the story, it almost seems like it was a response to the way that they were challenging him. But yet, the Chachamim tell us that Yitzhak's attitude in life was, I'm not here to reinvent the wheel. My father figured something out. I am the type that is going to further pursue that journey, that path forward. And you see that in the episode of the wells.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't account for the totality of religious life in America today, but I think it touches on something, which is that we are, by and large, the inheritors of such a robust Jewish infrastructure. Baruch Hashem, our generation isn't building the schools. We have expansions to do. We are not building the shuls. We have expansions to do, or we have more ways of exploring new avenues within the shul and new opportunities. So there's always opportunities to build. But by and large, we have the great institutions already built. And there's a challenge to figuring out how we find our sense of ownership and find our sense of meaning and purpose within the wells that are already dug. And so again, it's not black and white. There still is building to be done, and certainly new challenges, certainly post October 7th. But by and large, if you look at the sweep of Jewish life for American Jewry, and even in Eretz Yisrael to a large extent, we are kind of coming after the generation of builders. And so Yitzchak's life is very resonant in that way.
Yeah, so that's first of all such an important observation about our community and the era that we live in. And what you spoke about, Rabbi Goldberg, is almost exactly what I wanted to speak about, but I'm going to highlight some different aspects of the idea.
This is another demonstration of the fact that this is live. There are no wires, no netting to catch us. We really come here and have a real conversation that you get to be privy to and listen to.
Exactly. So Yitzchak's life is captured basically in Perek Chavav, one chapter, his exploits, his accomplishments. And so many of them, as you both spoke about, are very similar or the same, or even repeating some of the things that his father Avraham does. And so, of course, there's this important observation that Avraham was a great innovator, a very active person who was moving around a lot and engaging lots of people. And Yitzchak comes across as far more passive. We have much fewer words out of his mouth than we do from Avraham. And so there's this idea that as Avraham, the outgoing innovator, is followed by Yitzchak, who is taking the innovations of Avraham and cementing them, perpetuating them. And it always reminds me of one of my favorite psukim from Tehillim, Miyale Behar Hashem, or Miyakum Mimkom Kacho. Not the first time I've mentioned on this podcast. It's one thing to ascend the mountain, but then it's another thing to stay on the mountain, which always reminds me of the Seinfeld. It's one thing to take the reservation, a whole other thing to hold the reservation. Anyways, so what I wanted to point out, though, is that the Netziv in Hemek Davar explains that that's the pshat in the pasuk, much like Rabbi Goldberg was saying, that Avraham holid es Yitzchak can be explained by the fact that all of Yitzchak's actions, all of his behaviors were a very clear demonstration that he was Avraham's successor. The other observation I wanted to make, though, is maybe a little more philosophical. We tend to value more that which is new and innovative and exciting, to the extent that today, when it's so easy to buy new things, that's a stimulating activity for people to get new things. And some people even become addicted to it to that extent. But what Yitzchak as a character reminds us is the value in repeating, in the value of maintaining. Reb Chaim Brisker writes that to say a chiddush isn't necessarily to say something new. Even saying pshat and rishonim is considered a chiddush, because it's your contribution, it's your initiation of perpetuating these ideas, of contributing to the conversation so that it continues. And so I think not all of us are blessed to be innovators. Not all of us are blessed to come up with new ideas. And Yitzchak is the person, the inspiration or the model for so many people who are able to dedicate themselves with a constancy and consistency, doing what everyone else is doing, right? Not building schools or building yeshivos, but showing up to shul and shiurim. Those are the ones that are carrying on the legacy of Yitzchak.
I think there's another place in the Berashah where we see this. It says, Vayera alav Hashem. It says there was a famine in the land. Vayira ba'aretz. Vayera alav Hashem. Al tered Mitzrayim. Don't go down to Mitzrayim. Why does Hashem have to tell him that? Because when there was a ra'av for Avraham, Yitzchak's knee-jerk reaction is, I'm going to do what my father did. And therefore Hashem says, no, that's not the right plan this time. I'm going to tell you, you can stay in the land and I'll figure out another way. But Yitzchak is someone who said, I'm not here to reinvent. I'm not here to be exciting. I'm not here to be, but like Rabbi Pupko said, it's just about pushing through. This is what my forefathers did. This is what my father did. I will continue to carry the legacy of what it means to be an Orthodox Jew, to be committed to all these things that sometimes may be really difficult. A freezing cold morning, getting up and going to Shachris, a day that it's pouring rain. Say, you know what? I'm going to run out and catch Mincha, even though it's probably not what I want to be doing right now. But that understanding of following in our parents' ways and or what the legacy that they've left us typifies who Yitzhak was as a person.
Another mashal that's, I think, resonant and touches on this in a little bit of a different way is thinking about it like Avraham was the startup. Right. Where it was so exciting and they were pulling all-nighters, they, meaning like in the startup world, you're pulling all-nighters and you're working out of a garage and it's so exciting and it's new and there's so much promise. And then Yitzchak is the one who's like, okay, now we're like a company and like we need an HR department and we need a policy for this. And it's not the most exciting, but when you grow up from a startup and then you become a real company, that's when you have something that has staying power. That's something that can really be a sustainable business. And it's not as exciting and exhilarating, but then it's concretized and it's real and has staying power. And that's Yitzchak's role.
I was just at a conference yesterday, and a lecture was referencing the fact that not every founder succeeds as a CEO past the initial growth. And that if you look at all of like the big companies that were founded by a particular person who's still around, there's a certain percentage, whatever it is, there's many of them fail because the kinds of skills that it takes to innovate may not necessarily be the same kinds of skills to maintain and to captain the ship through.
You have to be much more risk averse once you're at the head of the ship than you could be when you hitched your whole self to a dream, to a wagon, to a vision. Now you have to be, people are relying on you. You have to make the calculated, smart decisions. It's a totally different.
Yeah.
Adam Grant has a great podcast on this.
Oh, yeah?
On work life, on the difference between founders and those that have the ability to. He's an organizational psychologist. He has a podcast called Work Life. Yeah. But I heard just recently, actually, a fascinating one on the difference between personality types and what's necessary to succeed. So there's definitely
there's a certain grit or motivation that someone has when they're building something new, but you need a different kind of grit and motivation when you now have to just carry it.
Terrific.
Shkoach.
Shkoach.